G'day everyone, Kate here from Narrate Church. This week, Adam wraps up our 5-part series entitled We Need You to Lead. He concludes with some insightful truths under the banner Leaders Are Learners and looks to the ultimate leader, Jesus.
This morning we're going to wrap up. By the way, you should get some kind of gold star or something. I mean, this is early. I mean, I'm a morning person, and this is early. Christian, you and Tiffany last year you were at the 11:30. I remember making fun of you. So good job. Like, Tiffany, you've brought Christian a long way in a year of marriage. So way to go. Sorry to point you out. Last year there was about a 30-person swing from the 10 to the 11:30. So I remember the only reason I say that is because last year I distinctly mocked them when I said, your friends at the 10 o'clock say hi. So this morning we're going to wrap up the series we've been in called We Need You to Lead. And listen, it's one of my greatest privileges to talk about leadership with a bunch of people who are leaders in all kinds of sectors. It's, to me, what makes Narrate so much fun is it's a group of people who understand that the kingdom goes everywhere, that work affords you the opportunity to serve God, and that together we gather on Sundays, hopefully just kind of forming on the launching pad, heading back out into the real world, as it were. So this morning, I want to wrap this up, and I want to take us back to what ultimately will probably, for many of you, especially at the 8:30, because you're the veterans, something that'll be a somewhat familiar passage, but there's an idea that started rattling around in my head a few weeks ago as there was a certain direction I wanted to go with this week, but I wasn't exactly sure, to be honest with you, exactly what thread we were going to pull on from the text. And then I had this moment where I went, whoa, that messes with me. There's an idea that I want to explore, and I think where it ought to be exciting, where it has the potential to be exciting, is I know that, like, you're dreamers, you're doers, you're people who you're always thinking a few steps ahead, and sometimes, quite frankly, that's not healthy, and sometimes it is. And listen, I don't know what it is that you're dreaming about, whether it's a new business that you've started, whether it's a new baby about to be born, whether you're watching what used to be a baby walk out the door to high school and you're suddenly realizing that it's not just your life anymore, it's theirs, and you're starting to pray for things like the people that they surround themselves with and the person that they'll marry and the vocation that they'll go after. I don't know what it is you're after, but there's this idea that what strikes me is it's easily missed, and yet it's crucial. And I think it parlays, you'll know, of course, that we talk a lot about this idea of the daily leads to the dream. And sometimes that is a motivating statement, but it's not all that descript. For me, these last few weeks, it's helped add some dimension to that statement. The idea that I want to explore is just simply that leaders are learners. Again, not a new idea to any of us, but really what I want to provoke you to think about is how intentional are you in your personal growth? How intentional are you in your vocational growth? How intentional are we to make sure that we're not just using the same tools, but that we're constantly opening ourselves up to new tools as it relates to being a parent, to a spouse, to a leader, to a business owner, to a community member? Listen, I know enough of you to know that this is a place made up of people who are passionate about things like marriage and parenting and work and growth. And yet I think the tendency is that for life to become so involved that what happens is we graduate college or we spend 5 years learning a trade, and then we just get busy with other stuff. And so I don't want to be patronizing because I understand that we all are learners. But I guess the question that I'm asking this morning is, like, are we still? And the story that stands out to me is found in the Gospel of Luke. Some of you might know him as Saint Luke. It's the third gospel in the New Testament, those stories that tell us about Jesus. And to me, what's fascinating about it is, I don't know if you've thought of this before, but if you were to take everything out of the New Testament about Jesus' life from about age 2 to about age 30, you would lose almost nothing. I mean, here's this man who, we'll talk a little bit more, has arguably, maybe not arguably, had the largest impact of any single human being in human history. And really, we know nothing about his life from ages 2 to roughly age 30. Now, Anne Rice has written about it, and there are some ideas, there's some post-biblical writings, there's some stuff out there. But a couple thousand years ago, when the people decided what was historical and what belonged in the text, they went, no, there's just not that much that we know about Jesus' life. And yet, if we're not careful, see, what we conclude is it's not important. And actually what I'm starting to think, and this is just an idea because that's what you pay me to do is just throw them out there, is I almost think there's a paradox going on in the text. That the gospel tells, that the Bible tells shockingly little about Jesus' life, and it's because, I wonder if it's because there's so much packed inside of what little we have. The implications, I think, are scandalous. See, the little bit we have is found in the Gospel of Luke, as I already said. And one day, Jesus' parents decide that they're going to travel along with their entourage, their extended friends and family, down to Jerusalem for Passover. Now, it's a Passover, maybe you've done like a Jewish Passover celebration, but not a big deal to us. It was Christmas to the Jewish people. It was the day. It was the celebration of when God led Israel out of Egypt. It's a really big deal. It's why the gospel writers spend so much energy saying that Jesus was bringing the new Passover, the new Exodus. But one of the little details we get is that Jesus was 12 years old. See, that he was going wasn't a big deal, but that he was 12 was a big deal because in the Jewish culture today, they call it bar mitzvah. 12 is when you're an adult. Like 12 is when your parents don't tell you to put your iPod away anymore because you're the adult. You get to decide. 12 is when, see, they didn't do this adolescence in between thing. They did adulthood at 12. So let's just pick up. It says every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the festival according to the custom. So they travel in this massive group. They get to the city. They celebrate. They worship. They party. They hang out together. Eventually, it's time to go home. They head off. And indicative of just how different their culture is from ours is the fact that they took off this entourage of dozens and dozens of people. And Mary and Joseph, Jesus' parents, they didn't even think to themselves, boy, I wonder if Jesus is with us. They just went. And they got a day's journey down the road before they had this moment. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among their relatives and friends. So they're a long ways off. And suddenly there's like, hey, we get the Parent of the Year awards. We don't have our kids with us. And if you've ever lost a set of keys, a wallet, an iPhone, a phone, like you get the thing, right? But once you have a baby, I still do this, but I remember when we had kids in those little vestibles that go in the car, remember those well, some of you still have those things. Do you guys, do you remember how you'd like get in the car and drive off and then you'd have this, oh no, I left him on the roof, and you'd look over your shoulder? Did you do that? I still will do that with the boys. Oh geez, yep, we got them all. You don't need me to tell you that losing a child is the worst of the worst of the worst. And that's what they experienced. And then the text says when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. Imagine how much different the city felt, round two. Just a couple days ago, it was a big celebration, the security of friends and family and entourage. Now there's two of you looking for a lost son. And don't you think that suddenly the horrors of Jerusalem began to come out? Suddenly you recognize that it's a city occupied by a foreign power who doesn't particularly like you. Suddenly you realize that it's a city occupied by all kinds of cultures, many of whom are traitors, many of them are human traffickers. Suddenly you realize that there's terrorists in your city, and they're searching, and the text says, when they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him after 3 days. Can you even imagine? Like the emotional exhaustion. Did they sleep? I don't know how they could have. And finally they find Jesus, and in classic teenage fashion, he's like not even looking for them. In fact, I love the humanness that we see of Mary here because she just lets him have it. Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you. There's that like, oh, I'm so relieved. Oh, I'm so mad. Like all at the same time. How do I express this clearly? And Jesus, because he's adult, and that's part of what Luke is doing here, and we can't get into all the details of it, but Luke is kind of creating a boundary. Jesus is creating a boundary here. And he says respectfully, why were you searching for me? Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house? So there's some allusion there, and there's lots of quiet time reflection that you could do there. But then what follows is where, to me, it gets all the more fascinating. It says this, then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, but his mother treasured all of these things in her heart. That is a telling thing. Have you ever considered why do we know this story? It's probably not because like Jesus wrote it down, because we don't have any record that he wrote anything down. Why do we have this story? I go through this as a dad. Teresa will go, oh, do you remember when Justice was 1.5 years old and he did this? And I go, no. And I feel like a doofus. But moms have this, they remember things. And probably the most likely scenario here is at some point after the resurrection, after Easter, after the realization of he really was God, Mary started telling stories and she went, oh yeah, I should have seen it coming. Oh yeah, there was this time. And Jesus did this, and then he came back and he still listened to us. And like, we were sinners and he wasn't, and somehow he allowed us to parent him. And listen to the way she caps off the memory. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. Now, I don't know what you have planned for your 15 minutes of chair time throughout this week. I would just challenge you to spend some time on this text, because I think the implications are absolutely crazy. Jesus, the Son of God, the one who many of us believe was God in the flesh, perfect in every sense of the word, 100% God, 100% man. What the text says is he grew. I mean, you go, yeah, well, there's that stature word. Certainly it referred to like puberty and things like that. He had to become a man. Okay, maybe that's what that word's getting at. But it doesn't just say that he grew physically. It says he grew in favor with God. That'll mess with your paradigm. Like, the implications seem to be that like Jesus was better at loving people at 30 than he was at 20, which seems to imply that had he lived to 60, he'd have been better at it then than he was at 40. The implications seem to be that his connection with God was stronger at 32 than it was at 22. That his ability to love people grew, that his ability to love God grew, that his ability to understand God. Apparently, he would have done a better job on Bible trivia at 30 than he would at 15. And that gets kind of weird, doesn't it? Maybe you've heard Harvard has recently published some sociological stuff. This is why I brought the nerdy whiteboard. What they're saying is that anytime we meet somebody or judge them, we put them in one of 4 quadrants. That up at the top is likability, and along the side is competence. I'm not competent enough to spell it, but I'm going to try. And that you can have low competence or high competence, and you can have low likability or you can have high likability. One of the interesting things is they're saying that when you meet a homeless person, you by default put them in the low competence, low likability quadrant. But see, the idea here is, and you're already kind of categorizing people, like you can be high competent and low likability and be semi-successful. You can be high likability and low competence and be semi-successful. But the heavy hitters, they hang out here. But what's fascinating to me, and I would guess we have to argue that the scale is relative, but the implications of Luke 2:52, I think, are that Jesus did this. And see, now this gets tricky because Jesus was sinless in God, and so we got to allow that. But we like our heroes in bronze, don't we? I read this week or a couple weeks ago, that Winston Churchill, he refused to spend the night in a hotel room with a balcony for fear that would be the night that he would finally follow through with his desire to commit suicide. Same story talked about how the idea that Abraham Lincoln struggled mightily with depression over the course of his entire life. Harry Truman, a president of the United States in the 20th century, didn't have a college education. See, we like our heroes in bronze. We like them perfect. And part of, I think, what Shane Claiborne points out very astutely, you see if this challenges you, he says we like our heroes to be anomalies and weirdos because if we can just say, like, you're a freak, then we can somehow absolve ourselves of the responsibility of personal growth ourselves. We don't like the idea that our heroes had to grow into it. Now, I know this is tricky with Jesus, but it begs the question, are we learners? And I think for those of you that you're just not yet convinced that Jesus was divine, I think the implications are even more scandalous, aren't they? Because you remove the divinity, you remove that kind of trump card from his impact, you're still left with a person who has had, there's really no conversation that has had a greater impact upon on human history than any single individual ever. And now you have to reconcile the fact that was purely a human endeavor. And the idea becomes that he wasn't ready for it at 10. And he wasn't ready for it at 20. And sometimes I've found myself going, Lord, why 30? I mean, what's the big deal with 30? And I wonder if the answer could be, well, he wasn't ready. Just wasn't ready yet. Gets crazy, doesn't it? And a little bit humbling and a little bit motivating. Next weekend is a terrifying weekend for the staff, because next weekend Stan Simmons is going to be here, not to teach. I'm going to start a new series next week called Samuel. Very excited, leading us up to Easter. But Stan Simmons, who some of you may know, led a church in Billings called Faith Chapel, one of the most respected churches in the Northwest for the last 30 years. It's not about size. It is about growth, in my opinion, in terms of just seeing progress. And that's a church that successfully grew for 35 plus years under his leadership. That doesn't happen very often. Well, when he was here last, was it December or November? I don't know. Last fall. Seemed like ages ago. Christmas is next week. When he was here last and he taught, one of the things that he said over dinner was, he's like, Adam, do you have anybody that's coaching you guys? I was like, okay, well, yeah, we've got lots of friends and there's lots of smart people. What do you mean? And what he began to talk about is that there's a few churches in the country where he's just made himself available to come and sit in on a weekend service, kind of nose around, so you wouldn't even know he was going to be here if I didn't tell you. He's going to observe a sermon and watch music and be a part of the kids team and watch ushering and pull into the parking lot and see what that's like. And he just wants to be a part of it, because what he recognizes is, like when you're family, you kind of miss the gross throw pillow on the couch. And he's going, I think I could help you identify some gross throw pillows. And so he's just going to come and he's just going to be here and observe for almost nothing. That's its own story. We've been joking on staff that Stan has his own holiday, because we're all like, duh. But my point is simply this. One of the questions that I can't wait to ask him is, Stan, how did you do 30 plus years of growth? Listen, business, church, it's all the same thing. Like, this is normal. It wasn't dramatic, but to grow a church from 30 people to 6,500 people and never have it be like in lurches, but just this consistent thing, fascinating to me. I'm not all that interested in being a church of 6,500 people. I am interested in being a church that grows consistently as long as we're alive together. But even as I think about asking him that question, part of me goes, well, I already know the answer, and maybe that's dangerous and that makes me a know-it-all, which is also true. But you kind of can fill in the answer, can't you? I mean, what does it say that a 70-year-old man who retired from an incredible job of leadership, that he wants to come to this little church in Helena, Montana that's, 500 people, and he wants to be here? You know what he's going to say, right? He's going to say, keep asking questions, keep learning. When you see somebody doing something well, steal it. Expose yourself to ideas. Get out there and learn as much as you possibly can. Stay curious. Stay humble. I know that's what he's going to say. He's 70 years old. I mean, he could be on a golf course anywhere in the world. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he wants to come here and help us serve Helena because he's fascinated by what God is doing here. So just ask this question for me of are we learners? Not were we, are we? And what would it look like if we knew that we were? In the world of nature, Henry Cloud points out that nature has some very predictable things to say about when a system becomes closed, which would be a way of saying it's not learning anymore. The second law of thermodynamics, of course, gets into this, but quite simply, what you can say is when a system becomes closed, it runs out of energy and it dies. It gets more and more messy, and it eventually dies. That's what happens. Picture a fish aquarium. This is the way I've been picturing it. I have no fish aquarium. I have no desire for a fish aquarium. But just imagine that you were to go to the local pet store and buy yourself an aquarium, much like this one, fish, plants, rocks, the whole 9 yards, plug it into the wall, and you're just thinking work, right? Why do I need to take care of a fish? But nonetheless, so you've got this fish, and it's plugged into the wall, and about a day later, you go, this is work, and you just unplug the thing from the wall. And you throw a blanket over it and you walk away. It's become a closed system, right? And you can begin to picture what's going to happen here, right? Things are going to die, water's going to evaporate, it's going to become murky and gross. And those of you microbiologist types are going, but there'll be life, there'll be all this crazy stuff going on. Yeah, don't ruin the illustration. It's death. It's closed. It's like the puddle on the trail. You don't drink out of puddles. It's a closed system. You know how you open a system? This is taken straight from the text and from science and psychology. And you know how you open a system? You need two things: new ideas and new intelligence. New ideas and new intelligence. Just think of the last time you resolutely set out to bring change. And think of when it worked and when it didn't. This is something that I observe all the time. I'll sit across from people and go like, yep, our marriage is going to be different. Like, we're working on it. Really, you're working on it. Yep, we're working on it. So who are you seeing? Nobody. Like, what other couples are you talking to? None. Like, what are you reading? Nothing. Okay, so you're going to take the same wisdom, the same intelligence, all the same tools you had, and you're going to get a different result. And when you say that, you just go, no, that doesn't work that way, does it? Like, we dramatically overestimate. I know I do. I've been trying to not follow the Broncos on my phone for 10 years. I can't. It's pathetic. It's hardwired patterns. What do I need? I need a safety deposit box to put my phone in so I can't stare at it. We have to have new ideas and new intelligence. And so and you guys, if you were to sit down and think about, okay, what does it mean to be a learner? You'd come up with the same list. But in order to just kind of add some practicality to it, I've done my best to kind of compile different ideas from different folks and from my own life and just kind of boil it down into what are the 4 things that, when we're learners, how do we know that? And there's 4 things that stand out to me. First of all, learners are experiencing new things. Learners try things. Think of you early in your career, perhaps. Think of you at another time, like you're trying things. Howard Hendricks, one of the greatest Bible teachers of the 20th century, used to say that in order to become a creative person, one of the things you have to do is become an expert on a new topic every 2 years. Why? Because it just provokes thought and causes you to connect dots and thinking outside the box in your current sector. You have to try new things. I just this week, just around here in the Narrate culture, tried to go, okay, so what do we do around here that is purely the result of exposing ourselves to other ideas? I wanted to use, the line I wanted to use here was learners expose themselves. I didn't think that would be appropriate, but you get the idea. Like, we start with Sarah or Caleb or Jenny or myself or somebody doing this guest welcome thing, and for the 8:30 crowd, it's like, who's visiting? Like, who? But it's really relevant to the 10 and the 11:30, and actually more so the 8:30 than you might realize. We learned that because we went to a conference in Atlanta, and Andy Stanley talked about the fact that when you put a dude in a row, he wants to know how long he's stuck in the row. And if you'll tell him, he might enjoy himself. And we went, we need to do that. In fact, every wedding and funeral I do now, I stand up there and go, okay, guys, I know that when guys like me get up here, you're going, how long am I going to be here? The sun is shining on my head. I'm going to get sunburned. 2 hours? How long is it going to be? And so I just start every wedding now by going, hey, just so you know, you'll be here for about 2.5 hours. And everybody does the nervous laugh thing, and I go, just kidding, 20 minutes. And I can physically see everybody in the room go, oh. We didn't come up with that. We stole it. We do this gather scatter thing, and if you've been a part of Narrate for 5.5 years, you know that for 5.5 years, at some point in our experience together, myself or someone else stood up here and said, hey, here's what Narrate's about. We gather and we scatter. We do that because years ago, I heard a guy named Rick McKinley talk about how easy it is for any organization to get off point, and that and here's the way they said it, I've heard Andy Stanley say it this way too, until you're barfing over the vision, you don't really know it. And so we go like, we're just going to barf over the vision. The offering, some of you recognize we take offering in a different way than we did a year ago, and you may remember like we used to take offering where it was like, hey, we're going to take offering. What just happened? I don't know, I'm not sure. And it was this like thing we almost apologized for, and we were beginning to be challenged, like maybe we're not doing a good job of teaching stewardship to people. Maybe we're not doing a good job of inviting more people to join this mission with us financially. And so we went a couple years ago to Journey Church and spent a day there as a staff, and just everybody kind of just split off and met with everybody within that place and from their respective positions. And in one of those meetings, we sat there and listened to the way they had changed the way they were doing offering. And then we went, well, okay, so give us more. And they gave us a book, and then we read the book, and we went, let's do that. It's not about this, but our giving's up like almost 40% this year. Just tweaking something that we learned somewhere else. I was thinking about like now we have mints in the bathroom. You know why? Because one time someone went to a conference and there were mints in the bathroom and they went, that's cool. We now have earplugs over there. There we have earplugs. Why? Well, because some people have sensitive ears. But the problem is, if the decibel levels are too low, if a dude can hear himself sing, he's out. I'm done. And so we have to push the decibels, but then some people are cowering in the corners because they're in pain. And this last October, we were in Billings and we went into a church just kind of learning, and they had a bucket full of earplugs. And we went, well, that's kind of creepy, but we should do that. And so we have buckets of earplugs. You know, Ales for Trails? Not our idea. Some friends took me to an event like that years ago. I don't like events like that. I liked that one. We moved to Helena. We went, man, these guys have trails. We should do this. We could serve people this way. And it's been this fun thing. My point is simply this. You look in your life, and you're a thief. I guarantee it. Like the best ideas you have, that you learn them somewhere else. And so I just ask, are you still exposing yourself in the most appropriate of ways? The second thing is this, that learners are readers. This one's uncomfortable because it's easy I used to be a reader, but I'm not anymore. One of my most challenging statements was shared with me when I was 20 years old was simply this: readers lead and leaders read. Heard that before? I challenge you to break it. It's almost unbreakable. Rarely do I bump into a leader. Rarely do I bump into an innovator. Rarely do I bump into somebody who's pushing the envelope, moving the needle, trying things, doing things that's not reading something. Maybe it's even sector specific, but they're not reading something. Which gets me to the third thing. I know I'm flying here because I guess I'm afraid of being patronizing, and I want to get to this one section in the book of John. The third thing, and I think this for me is the biggest one of all, like leaders reflect. It's not enough to read. It's not enough to get out there and try things. It's about having a system where you can capture ideas, whether it's the notebook on your iPhone or a piece of paper in your pocket. Like, I guarantee in the course of a day, you have tons of good ideas and tons of, I should email them, I should send them a thank you note, I should, oh man, that's cool, they have mints in the bathroom, I should try that. You have tons of those. The problem is capturing them. And so you jot them down. And you create space. I'm a huge fan of Evernote, a space in your life where you're just working through them. My friend Derry Long said to me years ago, Adam, if you're not putting your feet on the desk and dreaming for an hour a day, you're managing, but you're not leading. What does he mean there? Like that I'm not sipping on a pina colada? No, that's not what he means at all. What he means is if you're not working through the yellow pad and pursuing ideas, then all you're doing is managing what you got and the system's closed. And time's a-ticking on you. You know, there's this story in John that I think captures the heart of Jesus as a reflecting person. That all the time the text says, and then Jesus slipped away, and then Jesus slipped away, and then Jesus slipped away. But you remember the story of Lazarus? You know, there's this time where Jesus' friends, they come to him and they go, hey, your friend Lazarus, you know the one you love? Yeah, he's sick and dying. And it's almost comical because some of you will go, that's the way I experienced Jesus. Like, this is where I struggle. Listen to this. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister Mary and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Wah, wah, wah. I mean, seriously. And if you've ever wrestled with this, you go like, what in the world? That doesn't even make sense. And it's just like Jesus hangs out. Well, I'm working my way through the NT, right, commentary on John, just like those ones back there that we talked about in the fall. And what he points out is that if you go back to the end of chapter 10, Jesus just narrowly escaped from his life in Jerusalem. He was in Jerusalem. Everybody wanted to kill him. Like, they had him surrounded, and there's this kind of like ninja moment where it's like, where'd Jesus go? And nobody knows how he slipped away. But they were ready to take him. He goes back. Then this moment happens. Bethany, where Lazarus it's East Helena of Jerusalem. It's just a bedroom community. And so these people, they come to him and they say, hey, Lazarus, the one you love, he's sick. You should go do something about it. And Jesus knows. He knows that if he goes, it's happening. He knows that it's on the cusp of happening. And perhaps what's going on here is he's going, okay, Lord, got all these ideas, made all these thoughts, all these observations, but is this from you? Like, Lord, do you want me to go do this? Because if I go back, and if I go back and this guy comes walking out of the tomb after being dead for 2 days, like you think it made him mad when I healed the guy whose hand was all shriveled. Wait till they see me raise somebody from the dead. Really? Well, then the next thing that happens is a couple days later, Jesus says to the guys, let's go. And they're like, but boss, you're going to get killed. And he's like, hold on. And he says this, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. Now, I've read that verse 300 times, and there's this like, does it make more sense if I read it upside down? Like, what is happening here? watch what happens next. Jesus goes back. Remember, he walks up to the tomb. He says, move the rock away. And the sisters are like, it's like a fish tank. It has been covered it's going to reek. All this microbiology. Yeah, but he's dead. And they move the rock. And Jesus says, come on, Lazarus. And remember what Jesus says? He says, Father, I thank you that you've heard me. See, what some suggest, namely N.T. Wright, is when Jesus says, hey, there's 12 hours of daylight. What he's saying is, listen, I understand the implications. I understand what's at stake. And I've spent time praying about this. I didn't just read a book. I reflected upon it. One person I know says if you have an hour to read for 30 minutes and think for 30 minutes. Like Jesus was a person who thought. It wasn't just about consumption. It was also about the digestion of the ideas. And I wonder, maybe the only thing missing, I know this is where I struggle the most, maybe the only thing missing is enough silence and solitude where you're not staring at a screen and there's not something happening in the earbuds in your ears and there's just space to think and to reflect and be a person that goes, yeah, I know this doesn't make sense on several levels, but I'm telling you, God told me. And yeah, that gets freaky, but yeah, that's what it means to follow Jesus. And conversely, I know I thought this was a good idea, but after sitting with the Lord on it, I just don't think it is. Are you a reflector? And finally, the fourth thing that stands out to me is that leaders study people. They know what they know. And so when they're with people, whether they're older or not, they ask questions. You know these people. They're like, it's like they have no interest in your business, but they're always asking you questions about your business. That's what learners do. That's what leaders do. I want to close here. In a book that John Ortberg recently wrote I think it's called Soul Keeping, Henry Cloud wrote the introduction to it. And Henry Cloud tells of a time when he was in a psychiatric hospital in Southern California. He was the lead person on the staff. It was an inpatient hospital. And he says that periodically he would rally all the therapists and they would all come together and they would just talk about the different people that they were working with. Partially because several of those patients were being worked with by several therapists. Partially so that you could go like, hey, what would you do in this situation? Partially so they could share victories. And he said one of those meetings that he'll never forget is he's sitting there and the therapists have gathered around and they've taken turns. And one of the therapists begins to describe a particular woman. And she starts and she stops and she stammers and she stutters and she just can't quite put into words how she's thinking about this particular patient. And finally, this therapist says of this woman, she says, I think maybe the best way to put it is that she has no interest in the interior life. She just has no interest in the interior life. You know, I guess my question that I want to leave you with is, are you a learner as it relates to the interior life? I know how good your intentions were when you met her. I know how good your intentions were when she was 7 months pregnant. I know how good your intentions were before you started the business or in year 5 of the business. But I'm talking about your soul now. Are you a learner as it relates to your relationship with God? Listen, we work so hard on Sunday gatherings, but could I just be the first to say that the intention here is that this is not the full meal. Like, are you doing things outside of here relationally and in your own solitude and your own reflection? Are you doing things to grow? Are you getting help? Are you seeing a therapist? Are you meeting with some friends? Are you doing all you can on the interior life? I love gatherings. I love opening up the text. But I also know that if this is the only source you're getting, you're probably starving. And if you need some resources in that direction, we would love to help you. Listen, you wouldn't have drug yourself out of that warm bed on daylight savings weekend if there wasn't a strong part of you that wants to grow internally. Can I just remind you that good intentions don't get the job done? that it also takes that next step of follow through, and that we need each other pushing ourselves in that direction. Would you mind standing? I don't want to pray this weekend. I want to offer a benediction over you, and then we're going to sing a fun song as we head out of here. May we, Narrate Church, in the truest sense of the word, be learners. May we lead our industries and our sectors and our businesses and our homes and our community. But may we start by leading ourselves. May we humble ourselves and get the help that we need. May we break through addictions and carve out new time to grow in new ways. May we first and foremost be people who are connected deeply to ourselves and deeply to the God who made us. I love you guys.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.